Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'd like to open the floor to questions. We can take maybe 3 questions, and I think we'll have time for 2 rounds. So, first of all, thank you very much, Sana. So, 1, 2, 3 at the back.
Thank you, Nagash Taklu from Ethiopia. Thank you for all the presentations, including your introduction. But if we are discussing from SDG perspective, what our policies should be, foreign policies, without going to the root causes of our planet's problems, if we simply tackle the branches, we won't have real paradigm shift. I think when we jump from MDG goals to SDG goals, it is with the assumption we couldn't fulfill through the MDGs. It should be the SDGs with some value of change that is on the inclusiveness. So if there is high deforestation, degradation of the land, where our biodiversity is almost dying tremendously, could sustainable development really achieved is one question. Secondly, the population dynamics, be it on overpopulation or underpopulation. Europe, because of underpopulation, they are losing the donkey war. Their citizens cannot handle it. They need immigrants who could handle it. The underpopulation is demanding level. The same is the overpopulation is also a challenge. So are we handling the population dynamics in a right way? How in both ways we could have productive citizens that could sustain the economy. Foreign policy without addressing such things, can it be sustainable?
Thank you very much for your questions. Just in the interest of time, we'll maybe take your questions and take a few more from the other speakers. Yes, and then.
Thank you. Raymond Sana from the Center for Socioeconomic Development in Geneva. Congratulations for the publications. I see it's first draft, so there will be maybe more drafts to come, or a final draft. But congratulations, it's a good topic. I have very concrete questions. The first one to the first speaker, Mr. Brinkman. You know the concept of private military and security companies, I would think. This is a topic which hasn't been discussed much. There are a few papers, including my own, but the increase of privatizing war making through private companies, military or security related, is increasing. Germany has had a strong stance at the Montreux Agreement to reject or to try to limit the use of PMSCs. However, other countries are increasingly using it. So from a Geneva Convention and international humanitarian law perspective, it creates a problem, who to blame and how to manage this. The second question to Mr. Müller. You know, we have the SDG 10, which suggests that we should, by 2020, help the least developed countries double their share of exports in the world market. Now, most of the LDCs, and you're alluding to food and agriculture in Africa as an example, what they could sell is agricultural products. And we all know that that's not the case. They can't so sell as easily into our markets, partially also because our subsidized agricultural markets kill off their food markets at home. So what to do about that? And finally, just for all, there's SDG 17, and SDG 17 is about public-private partnerships. And Jeffrey Sachs and others have talked about the amount per year would be $4 trillion needed to finance the SDGs. 1717 is sort of the hoped-for vehicle to generate financing. However, if you look at the indicator for 1717, it is a de minimis indicator, means nothing. It's a tier 3 indicator. So we cannot measure what we think, most of us think, it's one of the most important SDG that needs to be thought through in order to make the SDGs successful at the very end. So what could you do to increase the tightness of the indicator of 1717? Thank you.
My name is Arne Lietz, I'm a member of the European Parliament, and I'm also congratulate you to this paper. When we talked on an SDG report in the European Parliament, we came up with the wording of SDG diplomacy. As this might be a new topic, the challenging situation is this topic is not being taken up by foreign politicians, more on development politicians or environmental politicians. We have to bridge this gap. We tried this with a report with the support of adelphi on climate diplomacy. We now brought out, and my question would be, as Europe has this framework on military, I actually would like to straighten something out. We have discussed it with the Commission, the Member States, that there is no financial aid from development because it was put under an SDG umbrella for security instruments. That is a new instrument. If we need it, we have to have this in the discussion, but not from development aid. So this is a discussion we hardly fought through, and we won that one in the Parliament. But on top of how Europe could act, the question to all of you, could we not introduce the whole question of our international trading system, basing them on SDGs? We have GSP Plus, which is based like this. Are many mechanisms, for example, the European Union, where you link points like human rights or ILO standards on these issues of having better trading system. Everything but arms for least developed countries, and then GSP Plus, you top it up. Can we not link SDGs that would bring us, that we work with these countries on the national plans, but that also urge then the Commission, who has no plan yet for the SDGs, and we have to report next year, that they have to come up with a mind on how we do consumption, how we do supply chains, how we really take it up. So that would be actually some homework for us as well in the European Union, but bringing financial flows and SDGs on the situation of SDG diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Aldo da Costa from the G7 Plus of Group of Fragile and Conflict-Affected States. First of all, I'd like to congratulate adelphi for producing this interesting report. I have a small comment and then one question to two of my colleagues who I know, Hank and also Elizabeth. I'll start with the last recommendation we have here. I think the last, on page 17, it says invest in countering fragility. You talk about investing in fragile states, all sounds great. I like it. But from the perspective of our group, the so-called 20 member states who are in the bottom level of development, who are again facing the risk of being left behind again. When I listen to Hank Young's intervention about how the SDGs came, the structure back in 2000, and we were the ones who are the leading advocates again on goals number 16. We're glad that this has been included in the whole package of the SDGs. But the question is that, there seems to be the panels that didn't touch at all about the inclusion of foreign policy in the area of peace and reconciliation. Elizabeth mentioned about your recent trip to Central African Republic. I tell you that the G7 Plus has done its work in the Central African Republic over the past few years. There are some progress, some milestones achieved, But the problem is that it regressed back because of the political situation back in that particular country. So there should be an acknowledgement of peace and reconciliation in your report, if I may. If I connect to the other report in Global at the moment, launched by Professor Paul Collier and the Oxford LSE and so on about the state fragility, they also recognize the need to have peace and reconciliation before you push for an election happen in fragile and conflict-affected states. That's my first comment. Now, my question now to Hank. You mentioned about the two solutions. One is about the existence of foreign ministers and also about the lack of data. You know that the very essence of this SDG implementation is about the implementation at the country level, shared at the regional level, and also monitoring at the global level. Now, at the country level, what else could we advise? Can we suggest to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to have this holistic approach with the other ministers at the country level, like Minister of Economic Development, Minister of Justice, Defense, Security, and so on? But at the moment, it seems that the lack of a whole of government approach is the one that is impeding the progress of SDG at the country level. So I'd like to see your perspective on that. My second question to Elizabeth. What else can we see the New Deal for engagement in fragile states? How can we revamp, or at least we can revitalize the spirit of the New Deal to fragile states so that this report of Adelphi can have some relevance in terms of investing in fragile states? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'm afraid time has got the better of us. We will have time after the formal discussion ends to continue the discussion over a drink and over some food. So for those of you I haven't managed to get around to, my sincere apologies, but hopefully we can have a continued conversation over a drink very shortly. But with the current questions, I think our panelists have got their hands full. I'm going to be completely unreasonable and ask you to each take your pick and answer whichever questions you feel relevant. So by way of recap, we had a question from our Ethiopian colleague about how to ensure that foreign policy has the right incentives to do the right thing, as it were, and not promote self-interest over kind of the sustainable development good. We had the question about managing the growth of PMCs, a question about how to manage exports, this goal of doubling exports by 2020 versus subsidies, a question about public-private partnerships and how to ensure that the weak indicators can actually be made more meaningful. What else can be done at the country level, and how can the EU funding support the New Deal? I think was that, and your question about about trade policy. Yes. So choose which of those you want to answer. You don't need to.
Well, there were two questions directly addressed to me, so maybe I'll take those. Although I don't feel very well positioned to answer the first question on the private security companies. But I can see that it's a very problematic trend. I worked a little bit on security sector reform in a sense, and one of the big goals of that is civilian oversight of the military and accountability. I mean, that is also something that we in the Peace Building Fund have tried to do, to switch from the hardware, building barracks or things like that, to the software, and that is civilian oversight of the military. And that is, of course, a long process. South Africa is a really excellent example where, through a very inclusive process, the security forces, which were of course dominated by the principal perpetrators under apartheid, to security forces that were reflecting the composition of the population, but also have a strategy and a policy that everybody adhered to. And there were credible, inclusive dialogues, heated debates, 2 million comments online, and shouting matches in Parliament. But in the end, the policy was adopted unanimously in Parliament, and I think that was a great achievement. And that accountability through Parliament is critical. And I'm not sure that when you have private security companies, that you have that level of accountability that we really need. The second point I want to make is that what I would really be worried about is that these are private, profit-oriented companies. And one thing I do know is that, for example, the prison system in the United States is privatized to a large extent. And what they do is cut corners to make profit. And what do they do? Smaller cells, less food, less healthcare, less education, no activities, certainly no training of what to do after you come out of prison. And there's really a lot of evidence for that. So I really would be worried about that as well with private security companies. The second question addressed to me was the $64,000 question from Helder about the holistic approach. I mean, I think that is really the most important thing I would say, that not only countries and international institutions, but in particular the UN faces, because we are so fragmented. And the Sustaining Peace Agenda really tries to fix that. And our office, the Peace Building Support Office and the Peace Building Fund, has that as the main objective, to really have every part of the UN, including the development actors, or I would say particular development actors, really focus on this. The Peace Building Fund luckily has some money to give an incentive, and we do. We have as a condition, we don't accept applications from one agency if you don't collaborate with others. If there is a mission in the country, we want to make sure that whatever the agency funds and programs do in the country, that it is in full agreement with the strategy of the Special Representative of the Secretary General. That's what we did in CAR, that's what we're doing in Mali. Even if the money doesn't go to the mission, we want to make sure that it contributes to the objectives of the mission, so the larger picture. That's not always easy, but money certainly helps. And I really think that this Secretary General, with his emphasis on prevention, with his emphasis on sustaining peace, and his emphasis on working as a system, as a whole system, and forgetting about the particular hat that you're wearing from your agency. I mean, he demands that in meetings. I don't want to hear WFP talking about food. I don't want to be hearing UN Women talking about gender. He really wants to have them talk about the UN system. And the global objectives that we face. Thanks.
I would also like to start with the important question of how to approach a holistic approach, how to come to the UN working as one. And I think here foreign policy has to play a very important role. Foreign policy, they have to do an analysis of what are the political and geopolitical consequences if you implement the SDGs in one way or the other. A very simple example is, what is going to happen if we don't achieve to limit greenhouse gas emissions and if we don't limit global warming to 2 degrees? It will have massive consequences, and I would like to hear a very strong voice from foreign policies. Of course, if it's too expensive to limit greenhouse gas emissions, then you will have to build walls, and the Mexicans are not going to pay for it. And therefore, do an analysis on the geopolitical implications if we don't achieve the SDGs or the climate agreement, or if we do it in the wrong way. I would like to again use a concrete example. There is a big debate on how to achieve food security in the countries along the River Nile. And in a traditional way, people from agriculture say we have to have large-scale irrigation and we need improved seeds and. If you do an analysis, you will find out that during summertime there will not be enough water in Egypt. So you have the choice. You can either go with investments to achieve food security in a way that peace and stability because of water scarcity in Egypt will pop up, or you look for alternative models. And here you need a strong voice from foreign policies to look at the geopolitical implications. I'm not so sure if I can answer the question of how to double exports from LDCs. If you look at the country of Nigeria, the biggest export in Nigeria is oil. They earn 125 billion every year by exporting oil. Do we really want to double the export of oil, or do we want to double the value of oil? What are the implications? Therefore, I think a coherent...
But it's not an LDC.
No, it's not an LDC. I've used it in order not to look at the LDCs, but there are very, very often in the SDGs proposals where if you look at what does it in concrete mean, you have to do a geopolitical analysis in order to see it. Same with trade. I had 2 or 3 years ago the pleasure to sit on a panel with one of the former heads of WTO, and I tried to criticize him and said WTO was not really involved in negotiating the SDGs, and he said, my young friend, I liked it a lot, my young friend, trade is too important to be put into the negotiations of SDGs. We have to keep it separately, and therefore I can only repeat that we have to have a holistic approach in looking at the implementation of the SDGs. Otherwise, the geopolitical price for failing to achieve the SDGs or to implement them in the wrong way might be too high, and also the investment case can be put under this umbrella.
Okay. Let me start with the question from the G7 plus. In EU foreign policy and development cooperation, we have for a long time very much subscribed to the principle of country ownership, and therefore I think that the G7 plus, you have done a really very important role, and one can really say that given your structure, and we did provide support, we are providing support still for the International Dialogue for Peace Building and State Building, where you are our partners, that you have been in a way, or you are punching above your weight, and that's you're with results. That's good, but in the end, to have more of a to be more recognized, I think it has to come from your member states, and you have 20 member states, and some of them are active, but others are kind of almost dormant, I would say, at least in public discussions. And then it also comes, it's on them to come up and refer to you and to use the principles and the approach of the international dialogue for peace building and state building, and it fits very well with the agenda. Many things have been taken up, but it's for you to get your members, to work on your members, to pass that message, also in dialogue with donors in the country. On the Central African Republic, a country which is very important for the G7 plus, for the international dialogue, for the international community, development community, and not in general, because there is no migration context in Central African Republic, which is a bit of a disadvantage for them, if you wish. We have, as EU, really put in, and we are putting in a lot of effort to assist the country. We are supporting the government of President Touadéra. We're using all our instruments, you could say. It's really a case where we put a lot in. We have instrument contributing to stability and peace. We have an EU TM mission. We have a Beku Trust Fund, which is sort of linking the humanitarian development. We had supported with the UN and the World Bank. We developed the recovery, or helped. We produced an analysis first with the government on which the national plan is based, and there is this problem now that it's slower in implementation for reasons that I just mentioned. But on the peace side, the lead is on the with the region. It's in the African initiative led by the African Union and the countries in the region, and that's very important that they come up and now conduct there is a plan that they have or mediate negotiations between armed groups and the government to come to a sustainable peace agreement. And it's a complicated situation, but I think we as development partners, we have accepted that the lead should be in the region. That's what I wanted to say on that, and that should.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to rush you, Elizabeth, but maybe it's a sign of such a pertinent topic that we have run over time. My apologies for very un-German timekeeping on my part in the German House, but there's just been a lot of very, very interesting substance, and I just was loath to cut this short. Sincere thanks to our three panelists. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear your insights, and I hope that we can continue this discussion with our reception. So with that, I will invite you all to stay to take a drink and have some food, and also to pick up a copy of our paper. I urge you to take a look, and as somebody has mentioned, it's a draft, it's a working paper, and we would be very grateful for input. If anybody has thoughts and insights, things that we've missed, things that we should take account of, send your comments to the email address that you Alexander?
Yeah, maybe just give me 10 seconds and then we can continue the discussion there. I mean, we put together that paper on very short notice because we felt that's an important question, and we felt that we have to kick off the discussion. And as you said, it's a very, very first draft. Very much appreciated the discussion there and the input that we got. We would like to continue, and we would like to have a very in-depth discussion with all you. So you're very much invited to comment on that. There are not only drafts to follow, but it's not, and it should not be just a paper. So we're discussing at all ends here in New York and elsewhere where we have this debate and how we are going to do that. And there were also already interest shown also by Germany in their Security Council discussion there when Foreign Minister Maas came here at this very first visit to New York to say he would like to have a foreign policy discussion around the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. So I think there is room and there is political interest also among foreign policymakers. So enjoy drinks and food. Thank you.